I'd really be interested in hearing about your roots in folk music, and I guess in particular about how you started in coffee houses in Canada. And just curious, what brought you there?
My trip to Canada, which is still near and dear to my heart, actually happened circuitously through an internship that I did at Rough Rock Demonstration School in Chinle, Arizona. It was the first bilingual, bicultural, community-controlled school on an Indian reservation. And I was at the time a student at Oberlin College, not in the music school, but thinking, oh, I'll also be able to take music classes. I was a first year student. And in January, Oberlin sends everybody off to do some project that isn't related to their studies for a whole month. And I found out that I had a distant cousin who worked at this school on the Indian reservation. And, I wrote her and I said, that sounds like a pretty interesting school. Do you think there's anything I could do for a month? And she said, sure. And I actually had barely ever met this cousin, but I got out there and it was fascinating. It was totally fascinating. And it was pretty much like going to another country in a lot of ways. I became the de facto music teacher for the school because they didn't have one, and I was an 18-year-old kid with a guitar. And I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about a culture that was sitting right in our country that we didn't know anything about. And I felt like I was learning more about everything in life than I was at Oberlin. So I decided, okay, well, I'm dumping Oberlin. I'm going to stay here for the rest of the year. It wasn't that popular with my mom, but I did it anyway. And then about halfway through the semester, some of the teachers I was hanging out with said, well, what are you doing next year? I said, I don't know. Haven't thought about it. I'm 18. I don't know. And they said, well, you should apply to McGill University. You speak French, and it's a really good school. And I thought, okay, what the heck? Applied to McGill, got in, turned out to be way less expensive than American universities at the time. And the bonus to that was I knew that Montreal still had a pretty active folk scene and a lot of coffee houses. So I was able to be a full-time student and then start going to these music events. Previously, musically, I just grew up loving music. When like my first musical memories are kind of torturing my mother to play piano so I could sing my favorite songs at the top of my lungs when I was 3 and 4 years old. And those songs were Little Brown Jug and Beautiful Dreamer. And eventually I took piano lessons, and eventually I dumped those. My next door neighbor best friend got a guitar, and I'm like, yeah, she's not outdoing me. I'm getting a guitar. I'm going to take guitar lessons. And I got a guitar. I took guitar lessons for about 6 months, and my mother said, okay, that's the end of guitar lessons. And the truth was, she couldn't afford them. She was a single mom with 3 kids at the time, but she didn't want to tell me that. And I think she was also thinking I would probably let go of playing the guitar. But that dream didn't come true for her. I was still like an everyday, I love playing. And there was a lot of music on the radio that I wanted to learn how to play and sing. And also back then, so now we're in like the mid late 60s, when you turned on the radio, you heard everything on the same station, on the same channel. None of this, the bluegrass people go over here and the jazz people go over here and the new age people go over here. It's like you heard Roger Miller, you heard the Mamas and the Papas, you heard Simon and Garfunkel, you heard Pete Seeger and the Weavers. It was you heard tons of Motown. It was all in one station, which I think was a really great music education. There's no one place you can go to get that now on the radio. And so I had a pretty eclectic um, taste in music. I loved Broadway musicals. I loved singing in choruses and choirs, which is really how I learned how to sing harmony, just joining every choir I could get into, every chorus I could get into. And so there I found myself in Montreal, and sure enough, there was a great folk scene going. And everybody was way better than me. I didn't have any lessons really. I didn't have any background. I learned how to play out of a book called The Guitar Styles of Peter, Paul, and Mary. And ironically, of course, 2 weeks ago, I was hanging out with Noel Paul Stuckey from Peter, Paul, and Mary because he was playing with Tom Paxton in a show. And um, but man, I was a sponge. So I could soak all that up. And that's what I did. You know, everybody who just learned how to play Freight Train from Elizabeth Cotton was ready to show it to the next person. And, you know, we're just trading all this music around. I did a lot of busking in the metro stations. And at the end of the year, I got a grant to take a troupe of musicians all over to play in institutions for the summer. So at that point, I'm a little over 18 years old. I've got this grant. I'm managing 10 other musicians. No internet, no answering machines. This is another era. And somehow I booked us in every institution there was and wrangled this group around. And at the end of the summer, I had saved about $600. I went, holy crap, I'm rich. I've got 600 bucks. I'm going to quit school and be a folk singer. I've got enough money to live on for the whole year. If I don't ever get a gig at the end of the year, I'll go to plan B. And if I get a gig, I have more than enough money to live on. And basically, then I dug in. I went through the phone book and I looked for every community organization there was, and I hand wrote letters to them because I knew there's only 5 coffee houses here. Nobody's going to make a living playing each of these coffee houses once and then you're done. You have to go find other people. And it's kind of a lot of the centerpiece looking forward to how Marcy and I have approached our career through all of these years. Yes, there are these shows that you do on fancy concert hall stages with audiences who pay money and they applaud and you get your standing ovation and whatever happens. And yeah, those are great events. But there are these other things that bring music to people, that bring meaning to them, that bring something to them that isn't in their lives, whoever they may be. It was the beginning of playing a lot more music for young kids. I used to substitute teach in the daycare centers in Montreal, and the word got around: get that girl who plays the guitar for next time a teacher isn't there because she'll do music with the kids. And then I got more and more calls to do things for the Girl Scouts and for some, and so in a parallel kind of way, I built this career that involved basically what's now the name of our company, Community Music. It's fun. Our current biggest musical project is called From China to Appalachia. And it's Marcy Marxer, my partner and wife, and Chao Tian, who is a Chinese classical yang qin player. It's a hammer dulcimer. And the three of us have worked to bring together these two cultures, find the places where they coincide, find the places where they can live happily next to each other, and create this whole new sound. And so, one of the things that we're constantly doing is reaching out, pushing the boundaries. What new things can we bring into what we're doing that keeps it
Yeah,
alive?
the idea of pushing the boundaries is really interesting because you started off by talking about entering a culture, I guess an American Indian culture that was like going to a different country. Then you go to Canada, and North America has a huge folk music tradition. It isn't just United States, but how we share our musical tradition with Canadians and so forth. And now this other collaboration between Appalachia and China, so you're very international in your approach. But the other thing that really interests me as well is the energy that you put into producing your music. You definitely seem to always be on the lookout for new opportunities or what's in the wind. You must have your thumb up in the air trying to figure out like what's going on. How do you go from one thing to another, from one project to another? What inspires you to do that?
I think the opportunities just are right in front of us, and we
Hmm.
say yes. You know, by example, with From China to Appalachia, I'm in my 20th year working at our local fabulous performing arts center, the Music Center at Strathmore. And it's the only performing arts center in the country that I'm aware of that has an artist in residence program where I get this opportunity to keep hearing new music and new musicians. Chow Tien was one of our artists in residence in 2017. And we became friends through that. And at the time, she didn't speak that much English. She was a little shy about performing only because she didn't feel like she had the linguistic skills to do it. And we conquered that by going out, she and I together. And often she would join Marcy and myself, or sometimes another group that we'd be playing with. And I basically just said, look, just come join us and you're going to get the hang of it. I think shortly after I met her, I invited her over for a jam session. And there was a wonderful clarinet player, Seth Keibel, who was a mentor in the program. He was coming over and a couple of other people. Chow's English was so limited that she actually thought this had to do with food,
Hmm.
the jam session. And she was wondering what kind of food she should bring. And I said, don't worry about food. We'll have all the food. You just bring your dulcimer. And she couldn't figure out why she needed her dulcimer for a jam session. And then she gets here and she sees everybody set up. And I just said, well, why don't you play something? And she's like, what should I play? Where's the music? I said, oh, well, we don't really use music. We just play. It's like, all right, well, we'll play something and you can join us. And then we'll go around the circle and your turn will come around. And by the end of the night, she said, this is life changing. I'm never going back to classical music again. I'm going to start improvising and I'm going to learn American old time music. And this friendship burst open. And that's the fun part. You know, when we started digging into the music we could play together, one of the things that we found was that there was a lot of traditional American music that overlapped with Chinese music in ways we never expected. We, one of the roles in music then is to make us feel like we belong to each other.
Um, the linchpin here is community, connecting people.
Absolutely.
For music. What's it like for you to perform live, and how do you connect with an audience?
What do I say that makes the audience care about what I'm about to play? Is there a story I can tell that's really fun? You know, if I'm going to teach them how to yodel, I might talk to them about the first woman in country music to sell 1 million records, Patsy Montana, 1935, a song called I Want to Be a Cowboy's Sweetheart. Marcy and I both met Patsy and toured with her, performed with her. We produced her last album. We yodeled with her. We might tell a story about her to make this concept come alive. And then when we do the song, they're all over it. You know, that kind of thing. I think that it's a skill, a talent, but something that we work at to be able to create that context that makes somebody who has no clue who you are or where the song came from care about it.
So by sharing a story, you give them some idea about who you are and where you're coming from, and also perhaps a background of the music that you're about to present. Is that the idea?
Absolutely.
Connecting through a story.
Absolutely. Connecting through a story, connecting through a mentor. I have a banjo that has the signatures of about 40 really wonderful and mostly famous banjo players. And the first person on who signed my banjo was Earl Scruggs. We're sitting next to each other at a Holiday Inn Express after the morning after a festival we're both performing at, and I'm sitting there with my banjo noodling away. And Earl looks at me and he goes, "Hey, that banjo sounds pretty good." And I said, "You know, Earl, I think it'd sound better if you would sign it. How do you feel about that?" He goes, "Sure." I run, I get a Sharpie, he signs my banjo. That's a story alone, and it allows us to sort of tell a funny story, but talk about this mentor that we did a lot of programs with, that we did a lot of work with.
What's your songwriting process like?
Arbitrary. It depends on what the project is. It really, really depends on what the project is. And um, I will say that there are two sides to the songwriting process for me. One is that arbitrary side where you just sit down and see what comes out and whether or not you can shape it into something.
You
And
mean
that those
you'll just start playing something? You'll
I'll
just
start playing, or I might start writing lyrics.
Mhm.
Or, Tom Paxton and I write a song together almost every Wednesday, and he's a master songwriter, Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award winner, wrote that very famous song, The Last Thing on My Mind, and about 30 other really famous songs, and a very good friend. And so when the pandemic started, we started writing songs together every Wednesday. We get on Zoom and we'll just go, "Do you have any ideas?" "Well, I have this line. Do you have any ideas?" "No." And then one of us will pipe up with an idea and we think nothing can happen and off we go, you know. And so that's sort of looking for some inspiration, but then working at it. The
Oh,
other method of songwriting that I do quite a bit is what I call songwriting on assignment. And Marcy and I both have done quite a bit of that. And it's either an assignment that someone else has given me, where we're working for another company that says we need a bunch of songs about such and such, and that will be the assignment. Or it might be we've assigned ourselves a project. For instance, and this is a good example. You and I talked earlier about our project called Sing to Your Baby. And we created that project because through so many years of children's concerts, every single concert we did, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, a parent would always come up to us and say, I always wanted to sing to my child, but, and but had three things attached to it. I don't have a very good voice. Some teacher told me I couldn't sing. I don't know what to sing. And we sort of mulled on it for a while. And then we decided we wanted to create a tool that helped parents be the voice that their child identifies with
mm.
in a loving way. And this is hard to sort of grasp, but we've even done Sing to Your Baby work, a lot of Sing to Your Baby workshops with parents and with teachers. We had these two lovely people come with their brand new baby, and the baby's in some little, car carrier or something. And I look around at everybody in the room and I go, "Tell me why you're here. What do you most want to get out of this? We have a game plan, but if you have something that isn't in our game plan, I want to try and be able to incorporate it. And so as we meet you, also tell us what brought you here." And these people looked at us and they said, "We have this lovely baby and now we need to learn how to play with him." Well, once upon a time, that was something passed on through tradition. It's not anymore. And of course, if you're not going to use too much of this, it's really not anymore. And so with Sing to Your Baby, we challenged ourselves to write songs that would be relatively simple and where every time we use the word baby, the parent's job is to put their own child's name in. Anytime you sing a child's name, they light up like a Christmas tree. They just love that recognition. And for a new baby who's not going to light up like anything at that point, what they're doing is they're hearing their name sung with love. And that's a very different kind of connection. And so when we're doing these workshops and we're teaching parents how to do this, our main point is, first of all, your baby doesn't know whether or not you have a good voice. They kind of don't care. What they really care about is, does somebody love me? And are they communicating that?
Did your mom sing to you?
Not very much. She read to me a bit. She read
Mhm.
to us quite a bit when we were little.
So you heard her voice.
I definitely heard her voice reading. And we
Mhm.
even say to parents, you can read these, even with your baby. And when I'm writing music that I'm going to play for adults, sometimes I sit down and I know what I want to write about. And sometimes I sit down and I'm just goofing off, like you said, on the guitar or the banjo, and I see what happens. And as long as you're putting your time in, it's like, okay, I spent 2 hours today. I didn't get anything I like, but I put my time in. And sometimes I find as a writer, and this is also true with non-musical creative writing for me, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days to do what I call prime the pump. You have a couple of days where nothing special happens, and then what do the next 4 days in a row, you get a lot of great stuff.
Well, it's been said that art is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration.
There's a lot of elbow grease in this stuff,
Yeah.
and there's a very small handful of very lucky people who don't have to work hard at it. I'm not one.
With all of your talent, musical background, all the things that you've produced, all of your experience, I'm wondering now why you're drawn to narrative medicine. That's where we met. We met at a narrative medicine weekend workshop. I think I sat down next to you.
Yeah.
Why narrative medicine? Why now? How can that possibly add to what you're doing already?
Do. So when I found out that Columbia had this certificate program, I went, there's a perfect match. I did have to do a little arm twisting to get past the you're supposed to have a bachelor's degree. But given my experience of 8 years with Marcy's cancer, all the other work that we've done as advocates for some of our friends and stuff like that, and the fact that, I even mentioned that we're writing a book called Patient Power, an Advocacy Toolbox. And I said, look, the other thing that happened is when we released All Wigged Out, our big premiere event here in Maryland was for Hope Connections for Cancer Support. Wonderful organization that we love. And we had a sold out premiere here. And on right around that time, I got my own diagnosis for breast cancer. I'm like, could these trains collide any harder at the same time? We're going to go celebrate the release of this film and share it with the world. And now I'm going to go live what happened in the film. On the other hand, I'm enough of a fundraising hoe that while we did that, it was a fundraiser for Hope Connections for Cancer Support. At the end, I took that moment to say to people, you've seen the film, you've heard this wonderful panel discussion with these amazing people, and I'm going to tell you that this is about to be my story. And I want you to dig in and make as big a contribution as you can, because these are the people who help people like me and people like Marcy. And their motto is, no one should go through cancer alone. Hello. And, you know, now I took a whole different approach than Marcy did. I put nothing on the internet. It's nobody's business. I'm having a private life. She was having fun, but I took a different approach. And I communicated with our large community of family and friends, but I said, nothing online. Don't tell anybody. If they don't know, it's none of their business. And I'll make those statements when I feel like it, you know. And that was fine. We had these different approaches. But in the meantime, I was reading everything. My stack of books having to do with narrative medicine and medical stories is huge. And I loved it. We're the only nuts who, driving to my doctor's appointment, we have a house in North Carolina and we drive back and forth a lot. We listened to all 30 hours of the 500-page book, The Emperor of All Maladies. I think that's fun. And I learned a lot. And I learned a lot at a really good time. So that's what dropped us into the narrative medicine world. And I keep on learning. I want to know more. I want to know more about how to help people. Marcy and I informally coach cancer patients and sometimes some other patients in advocacy. In the cancer world, we can also sometimes make suggestions based on our experience, although we're always clear. Look, we're not your doctor. We're not doctors, but you might ask these questions, And we really enjoy helping people.
You've got banjos and things on the wall there. Can you pull down an instrument and play us something briefly?
Sure. Let's see if any of these banjos are working. I I did not grow up with banjo or folk music or old time music, but I just got home from a weekend in Massachusetts, a big festival called Fiddle Hell, and I gave 16 workshops on playing old time banjo. I've been playing since about 1974. Ironically, when we met that same weekend in New York for the in person narrative medicine conference, one of the first people I met was from Calgary, Alberta. And I said, "Oh, I learned how to play banjo in Calgary, Alberta." She said, "So did I." I said, "Who'd you learn from?" She said, "Barry Luft." I went, "He was my first teacher in 1974. I love how small the world. Just a little bit.
Wonderful.
Just a little bit. This little machine originally comes from Africa. There's over 80 different ways that people tune it. That's one of the fun things. Now you get a whole different sound.